So, we've been thinking over the last few weeks about some of the I am statements of Jesus. I am the light, I am the resurrection, and the life, and so on. And today, we come to one that is, I think, particularly important. And it is this idea of him being the vine. He says, I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. Now that's quite a significant thing in itself, this idea that we need to remain, that we need to stay close to Jesus and connected to him. And that without him, we can't do anything that he's called us to do. And so that's a very significant thing. But when you think about when it was spoken, it takes on something more than that. John chapter 13 is where the Last Supper begins. And Jesus takes his disciples and they go into the upper room and he deals with them there for a time. Through, in fact, to chapter 18, where he is arrested. But in that time, he has this opportunity to speak to his friends. Now, if you knew that your next meal with your friends and your family would be your last meal with your friends and your family, would you think about it for a bit? Would you give it some consideration? Would you think about maybe how to dress the table? Would you think about what you were going to eat? Would you think about what you were going to wear? I don't know. Maybe you just think, stuff that. But I suspect you would think about what you were going to say. It's your last opportunity. So what are you going to say to your friends and family as they sit around that table with you? Would you share some of your life lessons with them? Would you say that you loved them? It's in that context that Jesus is speaking these words. And if you read those chapters, he says some amazing things. Quite often at funerals, you get asked to read the first few verses of John chapter 14. I'm going to prepare a place for you. And if I go, I will come again. I and the Father are one. If you are in me and I am in him, you are in him. Whoa! He says some amazing things. And then he has this prayer in chapter 17. And he says to his Father, I've kept them. I've kept them for you. Will you protect them and not take them out of the issues and struggles of the world, but will you protect them in it? And they're hearing all this conversation as Jesus speaks to them and to his Father. And in the middle of that, he says, I am the vine, and you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. So why is being connected important? Well, I've got a little illustration. Now, for those of you who don't like goats when I'm talking about sheep, I know this is not a grapevine. Right? I know it's not. It's a plant in my back garden, and it grows like wildfire. And then you get lovely wee flowers. So there you are, it's growing away quite the thing. But parts of it are dead. They have ceased to be. They are dead. And there's a reason for that. They are no longer connected to the plant. And it's dead. and it needs to be pulled out from the roof of the garage. But nevertheless, it's dead. Jesus, earlier in that chapter, in chapter 15, says, I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. Well, if he is the true vine, there's an implication there that there are vines that are not true. There are vines that are not helpful, that we should not in any way try to graft ourselves to and be connected with. And yet, so often, that's what we do as human beings. We try to find fruit and success in other things. And actually what we're doing is that. We're taking something that's never going to produce anything and we're sticking it in water and hoping it will produce something. And it doesn't work. See, if we say, well, if only I could make a bit more money next year. If only I could get a better job next year. If only, I was able to get the right clothes. If only I had the right technology. I need to have an iPhone 5. Who would want a 4S nowadays after all? I want the right stuff. I want the best stuff. I want the good stuff. If I have, or at least if I can project the image of having the perfect family, then everything, well, that's fruit. That's success. That's good. But it doesn't work. It's putting a stick in water and expecting it to produce fruit. It doesn't work. So what does work? Well, staying connected produces fruit. That's what it says. I am the vine, you're the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. This verse here is going to come up. I hope you can actually read that. Yes, you can. This is going to come up throughout this morning because it's really important that we don't just read it, but that you actually take it in and begin to walk with it each day. To be connected is really significant because it's there that the fruit is produced. So what is the fruit? Well, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. That's the fruit. There's amazing things that the Holy Spirit produces in the lives of his people. The thing is that the production of that fruit is not instant. And sometimes we would like it to be instant, and we expect people to change and to produce this fruit instantly. If somebody comes to faith, they are not just instantly going to become holy. Right? They're not going to know how to behave because it takes time to produce fruit. I don't know about you, but I sometimes look at myself and think, well, where is the fruit? I don't really see terribly much sign of it. Maybe for you, there's been somebody you've been praying for a long time, and rather than coming closer to God, they seem to be going the other way. Or maybe you're somebody who gets angry easily, and you've really struggled with that. Or maybe you're prone to being a bit proud. Maybe you also wonder, well, where is the fruit? Well, the thing is that if there were to be a fruit forecast, there is a 100% guarantee of fruit from here. I was online yesterday. I was looking at Arizona because we're going to be there in 30 days. Woo-hoo! Right? And it says it was 109 degrees and there was zero chance of rain. Zero. We're not even, maybe there might be a time. No, none at all. There is no, here, there is a 100% guarantee of fruit if you stay connected to the vine. So if you want to be more patient, you need to exercise patience. If you want to be more loving, you need to love. If you want to be more kind, then you need to be generous. It doesn't just happen. You've actually got to decide to do these things with God's help and see the fruit begin to grow. The thing is, sometimes we'll pick one of them and think, oh, I'll have that one. But if you went to a vine and you saw a cluster of grapes that had one huge one and 8 tiny wee wizened things, that's not the one you would pick. You would look for another cluster of grapes somewhere else. And it's the same with this. We're not expected just to say, oh, well, I'm going to be patient this week. No, we're expected to have them all. They're all expected to be growing in our lives. We don't get to pick and choose. Anyone who knows about vines knows that they need to be pruned. And they have to be pruned so that they keep producing fruit. And sometimes they even cut off what appears to be fruit that's growing. And they do that so that other fruit gets bigger and better on the vine. Grapevines would rather grow vine than fruit. They would rather spread out all over the place and just be green and lovely. And all their energy goes into that rather than producing fruit. And so the gardener has to come and he's got to cut off the bits that are growing so that the fruit finally is produced. And spiritually, I think it's different to being disconnected from the vine. But spiritually, we are also pruned by God. And sometimes that is hard because he's cutting bits off. You'll see sometimes the one on your left, it's just a man with a wee pair of secateurs. Oh, a wee prune here, a wee bit in here off. No bother. The other one, he's got a backpack with a battery in it because he's cutting great big chunks off and he needs extra power. And sometimes, do you know what? Sometimes God does that with us. Sometimes he comes along and he says, see that? That has to go. And it's going to be sore. Fruitful branches, they have bad spots, they have misdirected shoots, they have discolored leaves, and all of these things need to be removed in order that the fruit grows. And we all have things in our lives that are like that. Things that affect our walk with God. Our thinking is often misdirected. And so, just as a suggestion, here are some areas that God might want to prune in us. Our attitude. Maybe we are sometimes judgmental. And God says, do you know, that's got to go. If you've got to love each other, you can't be judgmental. Maybe it's the attitude that says, oh no, I'm not good enough. I couldn't possibly. And God says, in me, you are good enough. I'll help you. I'll be with you. That attitude's got to go. Passion. Maybe you get enthusiastic and excited about the wrong things. Maybe the great love of your life is not God. And God's saying, come home. Commitment. There was a saying when I was just a young gear. So many people who call God Father on a Sunday act like orphans for the rest of the week. You know, and it's great to be together in church, but actually, commitment to God is an all-the-time thing. And maybe God's saying to us, you know, you need to do a wee bit of work with that. You need to think about that a little. Maybe God today is calling you to spend just a few minutes with him every day in order to strengthen the connection that you have. Relationships. Some of the relationships that we have are not good for us. They're not honoring to God, and they're causing us to have problems in our walk with him. And maybe God is saying, do you know what? Just put that aside for a time and come back to me and walk with me. Or maybe the opposite is true. maybe God is going to say to you, do you know what? See that person that you really don't like? I want you to develop a relationship with them. And the pruning of that is saying, really? Do I have to? Well, okay. And being obedient. What about service? Maybe you've not yet committed yourself to doing something in the church, and God is asking you to do it. Or maybe it's time for you to say, do you know, I could help at the door. I could count the offerings after the service. I could volunteer with Young Church or whatever it is. Equally, maybe for some of you, God is saying to you, you need to stop doing that so that you can have time with me. Our motives for doing things. Do you tell people that you're really busy so that you look good? What is your motive for doing things? I also think, as well as spiritual fruit, we are expected to see numerical fruit, particularly as a congregation of God's people. God expects us to be growing, to developing, to seeing new people coming to faith. And that happens as we, connected to Him, go out and explain why He makes a difference in our lives. And we introduce people to Jesus. And they come to faith. And they grow. I think both of those are involved. That's something that I want to come back to a little bit next week. So, then, being disconnected produces nothing. Being connected is really important because that's where the fruit is produced. So being disconnected produces nothing. Jesus says, I am the vine and you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If you're disconnected from me, you can do nothing. And then in the next verse he says, if you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that is thrown away and withers, and such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire, and burned. When we disconnect from God, what happens is that we end up producing things that are harmful and hurtful to us and to other people. We become judgmental, critical, harsh, unkind, bitter, because we're no longer connected to the vine. So how do we stay connected to the vine? Well, I said earlier, there are some pretty obvious ways. Reading the Bible, prayer, coming to worship, having coffee with somebody who will encourage you, or taking somebody for coffee to encourage them. But it's about connecting with each other and with God. Spending time with Him. That's the most important thing that we can do. How do we stay connected to the vine? We do what Jesus says. If you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, he says in verse 10 of this chapter. If you keep my commands, you will remain in my love. So we do what Jesus says. It's like a parent asking their child to go and clean the room. The child goes away and comes back. And you say, did you clean your room? And they say, well, I memorized what you said about cleaning the room. But did you clean the room? Well, I made notes in Hebrew. I went back to the original, what it means to clean the room and what you said about it. And he said, aye, but did you actually clean the room? He said, well, I got 4 friends together and we went for coffee and we discussed what you meant by cleaning. And then, having done Hebrew, we looked at the Greek to see what it really means. And it's klinio, and it means to do it with passion. And you, aye, but did you clean the room? Well, we went to a conference where somebody taught us how to clean more efficiently. Sometimes you just have to clean the room. You know, you can learn it all. You can study it all. You can know the Bible back to front. Sometimes you just have to clean the room. You just have to make space for God. and give him the time and the place that he's due. You just have to clean the room. Maybe God's been telling you something for a long time. Maybe you've read it. Maybe your friend has told you it. Maybe a preacher has preached it. And you're like, well, I don't know. Well, will you today decide to be obedient to what God is saying to you? Will you just clean the room and do what he's asked? So, we stay connected by doing what Jesus says, but we also stay connected by loving like Jesus loves. My command, he says to them, is this: love each other as I have loved you. I want you to know that he doesn't just say love each other, because we all would imagine that in a totally different way from each other. My way of loving you might be totally different from your way of loving somebody else, and we all make it up as we go. So what he says is, love each other as I have loved you. The problem is that for years, these disciples have been arguing over which of them's the greatest. Even on the way to Jerusalem, they're arguing over who gets to sit beside them in glory. And here he's saying to them, do you know, what you need to do is love each other as I have loved you. At the start of chapter 13, it says this: it was just before the Passover feast, and Jesus knew that the time had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, having loved his own who were in the world, he now showed them the full extent of his love. He took his cloak off, and he got down on his hands and his knees and he washed their feet. The King of glory, the Son of God, got down on his hands and knees and washed their feet. And in doing that, he showed them how much he loved them. And he showed them what he expected from them. It's not about who's the greatest. It's actually about who's the least. Loving like Jesus involves sacrifice. It involves putting other people first. Instead of looking down at people, we should be determined to raise them up. It's here, in that context, that he says, I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me, you will bear much fruit. And apart from me, you can do nothing. If you want to remain in my love, he says, keep my commandments. In other words, do what I say, do what I tell you. And then he goes on to say, greater love has no one than this, that he lays down his life for his friends. Jesus raises the standard. Love each other as I have loved you. He raises the standard so high that we cannot do it on our own. We can't do it on our own. And that's why he didn't give us a big long list of things to do or not do. He simply says, do what I do, love as I have loved, and stay connected to the vine. If you do that, then you can love like he loved. It's when we're connected that fruit grows. And as we take little steps of faith, and as little bits of fruit begin to grow, then we connect ourselves back to the vine. And as we connect ourselves to the vine, the fruit begins to grow a wee bit more. And as the fruit begins to grow, then we find ourselves in situations where we need to connect back to the vine. And as we connect back to the vine, the fruit begins to grow. And you end up with a cycle of connecting and growing and connecting and growing. I said earlier, I sometimes wonder for myself, where is the fruit? I'm sure there'd be much more of it if I spent more time connecting with God. But at the end of the day, when a tree or a bush produces beautiful fruit, nobody says, wow, what a great branch. What they say is, wow, look at that fruit. When people look at us, what they should see is Jesus shining through us in our lives. And so, I suppose my question as we close is this. Is there fruit and evidence in your life? I'm going to sing a great hymn of triumph and praise, because that's one of the ways that we connect with Jesus, is reminding ourselves who he is and